When emergency first responders were overwhelmed by Los Angeles County's most destructive fire yet, a band of surfers, along with their neighbors and friends, stepped up to defend their home turf in Malibu. Their devotion to home drove them to show up for their community during the fire and for years afterward. And now, a model they call the Community Brigade program could change everything, leading to more lives and more homes saved during the increasing wildfires across not just California, but the world. Join reporter Adriana Cargill from KCRW, NPR's All Things Considered, Crooked Media, and more, as she investigates a wildfire story that is not depressing, but is, in fact, a clear hope for the future. Listen now to Sandcastles, an award-winning podcast about home, how we create it, and why we fight so hard for it. How do we reimagine capitalism in a world on fire? That's today's big question, and my guest is Rebecca Henderson, Harvard professor behind the wildly popular class Reimagining Capitalism. I had Rebecca on the show in 2020 to discuss her book of the same name and her research, which explores the degree to which the private sector can play a major role in building a more sustainable economy, focusing on the relationships between organizational purpose, innovation, and productivity in high-performance organizations. What Rebecca discovered over the last decade or so of research is that focusing exclusively on shareholder profits is a pretty terrible way to run a company in the long term, and it could burn this whole thing down in the short and the long term. The silver lining is that, as we try to present here all the time, of the 4 to 5 catastrophes happening in this country at any given moment, many also present unprecedented opportunities to build a better today and tomorrow for everyone. Welcome to Important, Not Important. My name is Quinn Emmett, and this is Science for People Who Give a Shit. In our weekly conversations, I take a deep dive with an incredible human like Rebecca, who's working on the front lines of the future to build a radically better today and tomorrow for everyone. Along the way, we'll discover tips, strategies, and stories you can use to get involved and to become more effective for yourself, your family, your city, your company, and our world. Here's my 2020 conversation with Rebecca Henderson. Our guest today is Rebecca Henderson, and together we're going to figure out how to rebuild capitalism for the world, for your company, and for yourself. Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you, Quinn. I'm honored to be here.
That's very kind of you. Rebecca, if you don't mind, could you tell us real quick who you are and what you do?
I'm a professor at the Harvard Business School, where I developed a course called Reimagining Capitalism, Business and the Big Problems. I have 20 years of research into innovation, technology, and change. I ran the strategy group at MIT. But 10 years ago, I came to Harvard. I was convinced that business needed to do something about the big problems facing our society, and I set out to try and work out what. This April, I published a book called Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire, which summarizes what I think I learned about what business can do to make a difference in the world.
Well, it's pretty timely. It's necessary, timely, and again, it seems like this past decade was well spent. The book is fantastic, and I really appreciate you sharing it all with the world.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, Rebecca, and a reminder to everyone, our goal is to provide some quick context for the question at hand, and then we're going to dig into some action-oriented questions and what everyone out there can do to fight the good fight. Rebecca, we do like to start with one question. It's a little ridiculous, but it sets the tone. Instead of saying, tell us your entire life story, we like to ask, Rebecca, why are you vital to the survival of the planet as we know it? I encourage you to be bold and honest. You're here for a reason, figuratively and literally.
Because we are in so much trouble. And one of the reasons we're in trouble is business has become persuaded. Too many business leaders have become persuaded that all they need to do is maximize shareholder value. This may have been true historically, but right now it's a huge problem. So my role on the planet at present is to stand up and say, I'm a professor at the Harvard Business School. I have credentials up the yin-yang. I'm a card-carrying neoclassical economist. I'm a member of the Academy of Arts and Sciences in both England and America. I have the citations, and I'm telling you, focusing only on shareholder value is a terrible way to run the company and is going to bring us to disaster. We need to switch. That's my role as I see it.
That's pretty fantastic. It reminds me a little bit of the role of scientists in Hollywood films that try to warn everybody that the wave is coming or the aliens are coming, and everyone's going, "Get out of here, scientist!" And then they inevitably show up, and he's like, "Well, I told you so." Sounds right on. So let's dig into this thing. Just some quick, just contextual thoughts here. I'm not sure if you follow the incredible journalist Ed Yong over at The Atlantic, who is one of our best science journalists, but also has been doing some incredible work on COVID right now. But he wrote just this truly comprehensive, wonderful, very sad, basically post-mortem on America's institutions this week, saying, and I quote, "Water running along a pavement will readily seep into every crack, and so too did the unchecked coronavirus seep into every fault line in the modern world." And that is to say, I think the virus didn't break us. Our failing or neglected, or in some cases poisoned institutions or runaway institutions have been splitting apart for years and decades. And the climate crisis came before COVID. It is still here. It is part of what made COVID, and it will be here for long after we're not trapped in our living rooms wearing masks anymore, at least for this virus. But it is very clear, as you alluded to, and we'll talk about today, the democracy that we designed here and that have existed in other places, and the businesses and industries we've built alongside those democracies in partnership with them really just are both not prepared for what's coming, but are also part of what's coming, because inequality among government and businesses and citizens is drastic and damning, and capitalism isn't working for most people, and it certainly is not working for the environment. Our never-ending cycle of growth and quarterly earnings reports has destroyed much of the outside world we depend on, and this is a ticking clock. So this crisis, though, all of these crises mashed together, right? And there's about 7 of them, might also be our best opportunity. There is no market cycle for the foreseeable future as we know it. We can start over, but it's going to have to be top to bottom. And so I do want to talk about rebuilding capitalism for what is the actual 21st century, or as Rebecca, you so eloquently put it, for a world on fire. I do want to talk, though, perhaps about the most glaring part of our mission here, which is that more than ever before, for a lot of folks, capitalism is going very, very well. The markets are booming, if a little more volatile than in sort of the peak hockey stick era of the last 10 years, but they're also fully disconnected from the reality in the ground in a lot of ways. Does that feel correct to you?
Yes.
I feel like I can count on like 2 or 3 fingers, and I know there's been progress made here, but from my perspective, my very limited perspective, the sort of 21st century externalities that are actually priced into our industries and our products and our profit and the stock prices. I think despite the past 10 years of growth, I would bet that there's a huge percentage of people, especially young people, that are pretty shocked at the way the markets have performed in the age of climate and COVID, but maybe they shouldn't be. Rebecca, if I had told you 6 months ago that a minimum of whatever it is today, 700,000-ish people would be dead across the world from a perfect virus, from a pandemic that's locked in our homes, where would you have expected the market to be in reaction to that?
I would have expected it to fall. I think what's happening in the market is extraordinary. My personal belief is it reflects 2 dynamics. One is the belief that governments around the world will do everything they can to keep finance alive and afloat, so we won't have a massive credit crunch. Mm-hmm. Second, that we're pumping enormous amounts of money into the economy. And we did so. I mean, we had a massive tax cut in this country at a time when we were booming. I mean, where is that money going? So I think part of what's going on is simple asset inflation. And this is old-fashioned, but I think this might be a speculative boom. I really do. Markets are so irrational. I can't comment on the valuation of any particular company, but
Sure.
those companies I know well, when I look at their expected cash flows, even under fantastic scenarios, I don't see them connecting to the valuations we're seeing.
Mm,
So I'm reminded of what was that great phrase in 2008? I know prices are too high, but as long as the music plays, I have to play too.
sure.
I think we're in for a crash.
It's pretty daunting. And obviously, I mean, the market has seen so many cycles over the past 100 plus years, but it is incredible sort of what these big five tech companies are doing to carry, for example, the S&P these days. And there really are sort of black holes sucking up everything around them in this just incredible cycle of, yes, like practically more of us are spending time and money and energy online because we're trapped at home and also because it's 2020. But at the same time, it's truly incredible. And thinking about those companies, for example, I mean, look, to be candid, right? I'm all for completely reforming capitalism and the markets and the modern worker, and I really want to talk about that worker today. But it's clearly a problem that's too big for capitalism alone, and I believe those companies have failed to prove they're capable of self-regulating themselves into even incremental progress. I mean, government is required, but a very different government that is younger and more flexible and adept and understands the externalities that are happening. But it seems like if capitalism is a ship that's difficult to turn around, government, it feels like it hit the iceberg 6 hours ago, right?
Well, that's not fair. You know, when I give your speech, when I say we won't rebuild our society without strengthening government, that we need a democratic, transparent, accountable, capable government, people look at me and say, well, that's what not government is. But what we're seeing right now is the result of a sustained attack over, you name it, 30, 40, 50 years on government as the problem.
Sure.
And a flood of money, uncontrolled money, continually stressing that no, government is evil, government is wrong. And I mean, you see it most clearly in the most recent administration, which appears to be actively trying to destroy the state.
Sure. What was the famous Reagan quote? If someone knocks on the door and says it's the government here to help, you know you're in trouble. Something like that.
The 10 most dangerous words in the English language.
Right,
I'm from government. Am I here to help?
Yes.
I mean, closely followed with we need to drown government in the bathtub. So we are in the grip of a movement which has decided that government is the enemy, which has systematically starved and attacked it. And so it's no wonder that it's not working terribly well. But the good news is we have models of government that work. It's not that we don't know what needs to be done and how it could be done. It requires a massive political and cultural movement to get it going, and the efforts of millions of us working as hard as we can. But we can do it. And I can't resist adding to this. It's been a mistake, even if you're a business person. I mean, you know, I think for individual business person, the idea that we just cut taxes, get rid of government, get rid of regulation, I mean, it sounded wonderful. I have 25 years of corporate board experience. I mean, you know, it sounds fabulous. But it turns out that if everyone does that, it crashes the entire system. And I'm meeting more and more business people who can see that.
Well, I think it's interesting, and I mean, you talked. I'm trying to remember, and I apologize if it was in one of your papers or your book about how only I think it was 1/3 of young Americans and Brits feel it's necessary to live in a democracy. But I mean, as you just pointed out, because this assault on government has been happening for 30, 40 years, the people that have been assaulting it and the people from the inside with this administration have not only assaulted it, they've changed it to the point where I mean, I don't think these young people that feel it's necessary to live in a democracy, I don't fault them because they're not really living in a democracy at this point as it's traditionally defined, right?
Exactly.
And the apparatus that they pay taxes to doesn't actually do anything for them, especially if you're a Black or Indigenous person in America. I mean, forget it.
Well, I think this is so important. You know, 70% of Americans said before COVID that the system was rigged against them.
Wow.
The statistic is 25% of people under 30 think democracy is not necessary. But what they think of as democracy is a system that has delivered nothing. Sometimes when I'm hanging out with my other Cambridge pointy-headed liberal friends and they're ragging on the Republicans, I say, and what did the Democrats do? What did the Democrats do for the white working families in Ohio? We talked a lot about race and social. What did we actually do? Could we go over that again? I mean, I think we're all complicit in this. We're all complicit in this lovely fantasy that if we only made the economy big enough, everyone would benefit. I mean, there have always been people standing on the sidelines, jumping up and down, screaming about structural reform, but it was so easy to ignore them. What COVID has done is make it so clear that we can't just keep going in this way. And no, I mean, we need a real democracy where people have real facts, real votes, and everybody gets to participate.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I want to come back to that notion, as it is now, of everyone getting a vote and everyone participating, because I firmly believe that there are more forces at work against the average young American voter than they realize, and I want to get into that. Let's talk about sort of one of the guiding principles, as I could tell, of sort of your thesis, maybe the North Stars that change in business and certainly government requires purpose and direction. But as someone who's worked at a number of big and small companies and seen mission statements that really are just a mashup of synergy and other corporate words, it feels like purpose or these statements need to pass muster in the 21st century as we look forward. Whatever this newfound purpose is that someone uses, to me, needs to be practical and tangible, and something that is achievable and measurable, right? But not in just some internal way, but for the public good. And so that makes me think of sort of the standardized measurables that have come out in the past 20 years and are slowly being picked up, like ESG and things like that. Where are these being standardized and accepted? I guess what's working, what's not, and please tell me all the ways I'm wrong about the idea of the more practical purpose.
And you're not wrong at all. My first test of whether a company is authentically purpose-driven is whether it's expensive. That is, are they spending real resources to do the right thing? Are they making the tough choices? Are they investing in the future? Otherwise, it's just fluff and words. Mm-hmm. And I'm not here to tell you that that's easy to do. I spent 20 years studying corporate change. I mean, I spent a year trying to persuade Nokia that Apple was an important threat, and you can see how well that worked. But so I know how tough it is to move organizations. So, this is a difficult lift, but it's completely possible. There are firms that are there. The only way we'll keep them there and get more there is if we measure what they're doing. If they have clear metrics that are, yes, linked to public benefit as well as to profit, and if those measures are replicable and auditable. So absolutely, that's where we need to go. What's happening on that front? Well, I think depending on how you think about it, it's either a hopeless cacophony or a new world waiting to be born.
It depends on the day.
It depends on the day. I say in my book, I didn't realize that accountants were the people that hold the key to the future of civilization.
The whole thing, right?
But they really do. I mean, this is super important. So here's the good news. It took at least 100 years to get financial accounts to the place where they are now. In the 20s, when P&G published their annual report, they said, well, our revenues were 20 million and our profits were 340,000. And if you're an investor and you want to know more, you're welcome to apply at our office in Cincinnati in person. We take for granted financial accounts, but in fact, they're the outcome of years and years of fighting and trying and measuring and improving. And so I think the really good news is you pick a number, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 people, including all the major accounting firms, but a whole bunch of other people are working this problem as hard as they can. It's clear that it's absolutely critical, that without it, everything else is just talk. It's not easy, but we're seeing groups like SASB the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, which is going industry by industry, working with firms, trying to identify the right metrics, testing them out. We're seeing initiatives like the impact. It's at the Harvard Business School. It's run by one of my closest friends, and it's called something like the Initiative to Do Impact Measures. But it's a collection of all the great academics in this space really putting their energy and time behind this. I think the good news, Quinn, is it's eminently possible. I mean, you can see we're going to be able to do this. And once we have it, then not only investors can push firms to do the right thing, which I hope they will, but employees and customers can too.
Well, and I want to, I guess, come back to two things there, which is it's been really interesting the past 4 or 5 months to see many of these ESG aimed companies doing pretty darn well, and these indexes that these companies comprise doing pretty darn well, and I'm not sure if that's people grasping at straws, if that's people looking at the other incumbents and realizing they're not ready to take these measures, and so they'll look elsewhere. Finally, are we looking at investors who are finally a little more long term and aren't as worried about quarterly earnings reports, or is it these companies able to finally translate the definitions from the economy from their accountants out into these quarterly earning reports so that people are able to understand them better all the way down to the retail investor?
I think it's mostly that the big tech companies look pretty good on ESG metrics and they've been doing very well. That said, there's a ton of research, and this is the subject of my scholarly work, suggesting that firms that authentically embrace purpose and couple that with a pragmatic strategy that's rooted in the heart of the firm, there are all kinds of reasons to suggest that they are going to be significantly more productive, creative, innovative, and resilient than more conventional firms. I mean, all the way from the psychology of meaning and triggering intrinsic motivation in the employee base, to the importance of trust in complex organizations, and to the ways that authentically purpose-driven firms are much better positioned to build trust, to the fact that if you're really authentically purpose-driven, you're looking at the whole vision, the whole scope of the world, and you can see how the world is changing. I mean, my personal belief is that we will struggle our way to a more sustainable and equitable society, and we will transform nearly every industry on the planet. And it's the purpose-driven firms that are out there trying to drive that transformation. And for some of them, they're going to hit pay dirt, and some of them are already doing so. So I think the existing research is really clear that, doing well on ESG metrics and embracing purpose does not hurt performance. I mean, we have cast iron, hundreds of studies that suggest that's true. What we're beginning to see in the data is if you can meld purpose to strategy, if you can really put it in place and act on it. And those places we do have good measures of that, which is not yet ESG, but where we do have good measures of that, you're seeing significant outperformance.
And that's kind of the key, right? And I don't think either of us are saying that this is an easy job. No. I mean, the to turn this around, maybe if you're a startup, sure. And I just had a wonderful conversation with the young woman who runs sustainability at Allbirds, who makes those incredibly comfortable shoes.
Oh, sure.
They're fantastic. But her talking about how sustainability and ESG and things like that are built in from they're in every conversation about product and marketing and strategy and hiring practices and such like that. And that's easier to do as you're getting started, of course. For the larger companies, not so much. I wonder if you could, I loved the part of your book that talked about, and I just frankly forgotten about, what JetBlue went through to get to where they are and how actually early they were going about it.
Sure. Oh, I love that story. Sophia Mendelsohn, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at JetBlue, is fabulous. So here's what happened. JetBlue was getting pressured because their passengers didn't like the fact they weren't recycling soda cans on the flight. So Sophia was hired to run a recycling program. You're the head of sustainability, but really we've got to get rid of these soda cans.
Sure.
So, she put her head down. She's wonderful. She put her head down. She said, okay, I get what's going on around here. I have to make money for the company. So, she's very quiet. She's not very quiet, but she's very polite. She started talking to everyone in the organization, like, what's going on? What are your problems? How can I help? And she discovered fairly quickly that she could start saving the company money. So one of my favorite examples is she suggested that every plane take off with less water in the water tank. Because it turned out everyone was landing with a half full water tank, and it's expensive to fly all that water around because fuel is the major expense. And so, super simple idea, cut the water tank in half, great. Well, then she started to try something a little bit harder. Okay, well, I see that your major expense is fuel, and volatility in the fuel price is driving volatility in the stock price. Why don't we go out and see if we can get anyone to give us biofuel-based jet fuel? And this is more than 5 years ago.
I was going to say, this is not like bleeding edge right now. This was pretty ahead of the game.
More than 5 years ago. And she went out and she signed a contract. At the time, it was the largest contract ever signed for a flat price, and it was a good price. And everyone's like, whoa, that this woman kind of knows what she's doing, that this is good. What else can we do around here? And she kept doing these kind of small things. And then the big effort that's in my book, but you should talk to her now. There's no stopping her.
She's doing a ton of things.
But the big thing that's in my book is she went to investor relations and said, well, can I help you? And they said, well, no, it's sustainability, we don't care. And she said, what's your problem? And the investor relations people said, the problem is people keep coming in and out of the stock. That we have mostly hedge funds and short-term oriented investors, and we want long-term oriented investors because we think we're building a firm which is all about treating our employees well, going the extra mile for our customers, and really building a different kind of airline. And we can't seem to tell that story. And she said, well, you know what you need? You need SASB. You need the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board.
I love it.
And, we need the measures. And so, she was the first airline in SASB, and she put the metrics in place, and she trained the investor relations people like how to have those conversations. And they love her. She changed who knows what really changes the composition of the stock. But when you look at the data, it's very clear. The number of long-term investors in the stock went up significantly. Volatility of the stock went down. I mean, and everybody loved her. So her approach has been like, what can I do to make this company more successful? And what she says is that now she's done it. Now she has this language of sustainability, and she has some things under her belt. Now she can begin to do much more. That just as your friend at Allbirds says it's part of every conversation, that's beginning to happen at JetBlue.
Which again is not an easy thing.
No, super hard. I'm talking about a 6-year journey, an incredibly energetic, thoughtful, and smart person. But she was working with a firm whose values at bedrock were pretty good. And I think that's very helpful.
How do you feel like our fictional company X can translate their new purpose down into the ranks of the workers? How do they earn that trust? Because it's not, again, pivoting backwards, it's not just about performing ESG on the outside for your earnings or your bottom line or the markets, but internally as well. And part of being a happy employee and a productive employee means feeling valued and feeling challenged and productive. And that obviously starts with, and a lot of places don't do this, actually paying them a living wage in money, but also in benefits like parental leave, and to challenge them so that they can be invigorated by this new company-wide shared purpose, spiritually, but also practically down to the worker. How do we find that best trickles down?
So
Please.
To me, it's not about trickling down. It's absolutely fundamental. The phrase I use in the book is high road employment practices. This radical idea that you should treat everyone with dignity and respect as a full human being. One of the firms I know of that does this talks about everyone is someone's precious child. The full realization of everybody's humanity. And then you put in place a high-performance work system. What does that mean? For sure, it means a living wage and decent benefit and stable employment and significant investments in training. But it also means, because you can't afford to pay those increased wages unless you do the rest of this stuff, it means empowering the workforce, designing work so that having people on the front lines who are totally engaged with the work and able to make decisions really makes a difference to the business. So you can't just write a larger check. I mean, yes, that will get you some ways, but we know for all kinds of reasons it's not enough. You
Sure.
need to change the way you think about work and the way you manage, the way you talk to people. And how do you signal authenticity? You don't behave like a bastard.
Sure.
You treat people as if they're really people.
The threshold is quite low at this point.
Yes, and what is so puzzling about this, Quinn, it's just so bizarre, is, my great friend and colleague, Zainab Ton, who's a professor at MIT and has this fabulous book called The Good Job Strategy.
Mm-hmm.
She has all this data showing that managing this way gives you so many better outcomes. And, then I went back when I was writing my book, and we have data from 200 years ago and 100 years ago and 50 years ago. I mean, there was a plant in Procter & Gamble that started running this work system, and it became so much more productive and so much more innovative that the management hid the data because they didn't think anyone would believe it. The trouble is this way of working requires, can I say this on your podcast?
You can say just about anything on this podcast.
Emotional vulnerability, self-knowledge, a belief in the underlying goodness and capacity of human beings. It requires not putting yourself first. I mean, the leaders who enable these kinds of firms, they're super people. Now, my experience has been you don't have to change out the entire workforce. It's people want to be managed this way. They really do. Mm-hmm. It's providing the space and deciding to make the investment. I mean, it's a tough transition. It takes a couple of years to put this in place before people really begin really believe you're serious. You need to change how you think about the work, but it is absolutely possible. And oh my goodness, it's so much more fun when you're on the other side.
Sure, but I do imagine, like you said, and I don't want to discount it here, that making emotional vulnerability part of your company's mandate. I imagine in some cases, if not a number of cases, that's a tough one to quantify for those accountants that we've realized do hold the keys to changing this whole thing.
Well, let me give you an actual fact, which is very helpful. It turns out that in the average industry, the top 10% most productive firms are more than twice as productive as the bottom 10%. That is, they take the same inputs and they produce more than twice the output. I spent 20 years in windowless conference rooms at the National Bureau of Economic Research trying to make this result go away. We all thought it was measurement error, that somehow if you could control for differences in capital or differences in human capital, educational levels, where the managers were trained, maybe it was price cost margins and some firms had mini monopolies in the markets they served. Controlling absolutely everything, the result does not go away. It's now a standard result in modern economics. Empirically, the theorists are still like, what is this?
Right.
Because it turns out that management really matters. And, my colleagues, John Van Reenen and Nick Bloom, who I think will get the Nobel Prize for this work, got measures of productivity and measures of management practice from thousands of firms across the whole world. And the result is absolutely there. And it's correlated with high-performing teams, with strong levels of communication, with high investments in training. I mean, it looks easy. If I showed you the list, you go, no problem, just do it.
Sure.
Toyota's been doing it forever.
Oh, God, forever.
You look at that list and then you watch firms try and do it. And without a real commitment to values and purpose and to people, you can't make it work. You have to have super high levels of trust in the organization. And, our dominant management mode, which is, excuse me, we're in this for the investors, and most particularly, we're in this for me. I'm in charge. The rest of you are minions, is not a great way to manage this way,
Sure.
and gets you into all kinds of trouble.
And that's, of course, I try to keep coming back to the things that are built into now our society after this 30, 40-year push and our economies and our industries, that these ideas and these measurables and these progressive companies are fighting against. And there's things like CEO pay is mostly tied to stock price, and stock prices are for some of these companies, out of control. And so, the workers are making, nowhere near the same percentage as they were 25 years ago, 30 years ago, as the seaboard in these companies. And that's hard when all we see, like you mentioned, the tax cut from whatever. God, what was that now? I mean, time means nothing at this point. But was it 2 years ago? And what do we mostly get? Buybacks.
Right.
The American worker is still just suffering for the most part, it seems like.
And the case I keep trying to make is this is a problem for business. Part of the issue is many senior people spend their times in a kind of bubble. They travel on jets, they meet people like them. When you meet them, often their heart's in the right place, they think they're doing the right thing, but, it's burning out there. One of the things I've learned as I've been talking about my book is how many people want to throw capitalism out the window.
Sure.
They say to me, why should we reimagine it? Why don't we just get rid of it? And I tell groups of business people, we keep going this way. Where we end up, you are not going to like. I mean, unchecked climate change is going to be an economic disaster, but the social costs and political costs of continuing to flaunt your wealth and do nothing about people who are struggling to hold body and soul together and working just as hard as you are. At much less interesting and engaging jobs, may I say.
Sure.
That this makes no sense. Now, of course, that means we have a collective action problem, right? Business as a whole would love it if we rebuilt our institutions and put the right rules in place, I hope. It's trying to persuade business to act on that collective case that's tricky, but I don't think it's impossible.
I don't think it's impossible either. And again, I come back to a few things. One is, which, again, it's hard to say to people like, look, we can make democracy work for you. And them going, well, I'm under 40 and it's never worked for me. And I feel like it's important to point out to them, like, yes, but this isn't democracy. That's why it hasn't worked for you, is because this is the thing I'm trying to sell you is not the thing that you've been experiencing. It's something entirely different. And so it does take rebuilding it from the way it was supposed to be, which is where you actually have a voice in the matter. And for instance, for a company, you actually, if you're a worker, you're part of the workers who get to add a few seats to the board instead of, you look at something like Facebook where Zuckerberg has basically unlimited power, and the employees can be incredibly unhappy about privacy or about climate or about all the racial artificial intelligence stuff that happens there, and it doesn't matter. They have no power.
For sure. I think the good news, and I'm sure you do this, is there have been times and places when both capitalism and democracy have worked much better. The examples I like are Germany, post-World War II.
Sure.
I talk a lot about Denmark. But, I talk about the US in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Now, when you do that, you have to put a big asterisk. You have to say, without all the racism and misogyny. But if you can imagine, but at the time, General Motors had a stakeholder chart in their annual report. Here's the value we're creating for stakeholders. The idea that the jobs they created should be good jobs was taken for granted. The idea that business should sit down with unions and try and work out a way that worked for everyone, that worked very well. Now, when I say unions, people freak out for all kinds of good reasons. But when you look at Germany and how they've been able to use unions to force real investments in training and in apprenticeships, when you see average levels of wages, I mean, Germany is a manufacturing powerhouse. They've created so much value. And how did they do that? By making nearly everyone in that society fully trained and doing a job that they loved and really, really making a difference. And people say to me, well, the Danes, Denmark's small and the Danish have this wonderful culture. They all love each other. And I say, well, you should read a bit more about late 19th century Danish history. The Danes are just like the rest of us. They got to the place where they are now because in the late 19th century, they just lost a major war. Capital and labor were completely at war with each other. The country was falling apart. And one of the business leaders said, wait, this is not working. Let's sit down with labor, with government, and try and build a society that works for us. And they've had 100 years to practice doing that. And my goodness, they're in a much better place. So
it takes time.
It takes time. No, there's no magic bullet. We cannot snap our fingers. And we are badly off course here in the US. It's going to take a while to get back on track.
I want to just talk for a minute again, because I don't want to, I want to say clearly, like, I do believe that these things are possible, in part because of the ticking clock. These are not optional things anymore. Rebuilding capitalism and rebuilding democracy, they have to happen or it's kaput. I mean, we're already going to have mass suffering as it is. And a lot of places already are in that place where we're seeing, we have to pick the cities we're going to abandon, et cetera, et cetera. But I do always want to be sort of objective, and especially in our sense of trying to stand in for our audience. And I woke up... This is something nobody should ever say, but I woke up this morning thinking about the Koch brothers. Mm-hmm. When we see everyone marching in the streets recently, and we talk about these companies that, on the other hand, that are doing their best and standing by their workers. But you've mentioned before, and again, I apologize, I can't remember if it's in one of your papers or a speech or in the book, but how one of the traits of an extractive political economy is influential but opaque interest groups. Is that correct? Did I get that correct?
Absolutely, you did.
I've kind of always felt, but even more so than ever these days, I really feel like most Americans don't understand how pervasive that is here, and how little control the young American voter has. What they're really fighting against. If you don't mind, I've been trying to work this out in my head all morning,
sure.
Sort of how comprehensive the system is. And at any point, please just say that's incorrect or leave me down a different.
Sure. I mean, so I have good news and bad news.
Please.
The good news is most Americans have emotionally a very good sense of what's going on. When you ask Americans, should we take money out of politics, you get bizarrely high levels of agreement regardless of party. Mm-hmm. They know how corrupt this is. That number I gave you, 70% the system is rigged, people know.
Sure. Right. Sure. And like you said, that was before COVID.
Right. That's before COVID. So that's the good news. Here's the bad news. Oh my goodness, we're in a tough place. I talked to Anand Giridharadas, the guy who wrote Winners Take All. Sure. And he said, Rebecca, plutocrats gotta plute. What are you talking about? So a couple of ways to think about this. First, I am not optimistic in the sense that if you ask me, what are the odds we're going to solve this and we're going to be fine? I'd say pretty small. Mm-hmm. If we just, things just continue to roll. I told you, I was the Eastman Kodak professor of management. I know how hard it is to change firms. And this is when they're looking death in the face. They still can't get themselves to change. Sure. So I understand that, but I am hopeful. So why? COVID has shown us, I love your description from Ed Young's article. It's soaked into all the cracks. COVID has soaked into all the cracks that were already there. We can see what's happening. The reason I continue to believe that it's important to talk about business as part of the solution is that it's really important to split the elite. If we're always going to have a group of people with infinite money who think the free market is the only way to go and anything else will make things worse, and maybe they actually believe it, and it makes them incredibly rich, and they're spreading that money around to reinforce their position. But there are thousands of business people and hundreds of CEOs of very large organizations who can see that where we're going is the road to nowhere. I think, I was talking to a bunch of CEOs in January before COVID, maybe 90 people in the room. there were 2 women. When I first walked into the room, I lost it for a moment and I said, "Are there no women in this room?" Which you're never supposed to say, but actually said it because it was so male. It was so old. It was so white. And I started talking about climate change. And I was teaching a case about, I think it was about Unilever in the tea business. And, you can make money and do well, and purpose is the future. And I promise you, everyone in that room was sitting back with their arms crossed, when can we get on to the next lecture? And this was so bad that about halfway through, I just lost it. And I said, "Tell me, what do your children think about climate change?" And everyone in the room lit up. They leant forward and they started talking with another part of their mind. It was so interesting. And yes, it's a huge issue, and my children are after me all the time, and they want me to do things at the firm, and what can I do? And once I got them there, then we could have a real conversation. It's if we can persuade a significant share of business people that it is in their interest to do the right thing and put some daylight between them and the shareholder value maximization at any cost, I think that will be hugely helpful. My reading, when I looked through history to try and find times when business had really made a difference, it was when a portion of the business elite said, "Okay, we'll stop fighting. We will sit down and work with you." So, of course, we need a massive political and social movement. Absolutely. We need to change out our politicians. Every one of us needs to be as engaged as we can be as consumers, as neighbors, as voters, as employees in pushing for this change. That's what will really drive things. But to have a group of business people say, how can I help? And here the strategy faculty member in me says, if we can persuade them to begin to build our business model on doing the right thing, they have a strong economic interest in insisting that everybody else does too. So I think there's a virtuous circle here that we could get going. But again, I wake up thinking about the Koch brothers.
It's not great.
It's not great. And, let's talk about Mexico, and let's talk about China, and let's talk about Russia. I mean, it seems to be the history of the human race that the rich and the powerful try and grab everything for themselves. What do we know about what fights back against that? It's organized power. It's the rest of us getting together and saying, this is not okay. So that's what we need to do. Organize.
I'm 1,000 throws down the microphone, walks out. A few things on that note, which is it feels like I'm a big fan of, and I've been asked a lot in recent months as people kind of go like, "Oh my God, what the hell is happening with the world? I should have listened to you on climate change, and now there's COVID. Like, can you come coach or consult or whatever?" As sort of a generalist, place, trying to connect the dots as much as possible. But I haven't done that because I'm trapped at home with my children. But I do believe in taking the facts that are on the ground, and you can extrapolate a little bit into the near future to things that are most likely going to happen. Again, it's all probabilities at that point. And then we don't have a whole hell of a lot of an idea past that. But I do believe, like you said, of course, we need to overturn democracy and get everyone new into power, and young people and smart people and diverse people. But business is more powerful than it's ever been. So we have to use that, like you said. And I do believe, if you take, a company like Apple, which is nowhere near from perfect, but if they will, what was it a few weeks ago said, they're going to go carbon neutral by, I don't remember what it was, 2035, maybe 2050. That is truly an incredible undertaking because of their supply lines. And if we can have more companies like that doing that, I mean, it feels like, all the associations of mayors that stepped up in the cities and such when we backed out of the Paris Agreement and Trump got elected, who said like, well, then fine, then cities will do it or states will do it. It feels like, if companies are going to be this powerful, then we need to push them to not to fill in the gaps, but to, use their power for good, I guess, to go back to Spider-Man.
It's not that business can fix it. It's not that we can say to CEOs, okay, purpose-driven firms, you've got this. Absolutely not.
Right.
But I do think if we had some section of the business community really focused on these issues, people would experience what it means to be properly treated, to work in these kinds of firms. They would start demonstrating, they are demonstrating the kinds of business models that will work to create great jobs and address environmental problems and make money, so that then politicians, when they come to drive these kinds of changes, can point to them and say, look, don't tell me I'm going to put you out of business. Firm X is paying wages Y and benefits Z, and firm Alpha is cut their carbon emissions to zero and they're doing fine,
Sure.
and here's how to do it. And business is, I'm on the board of a nonprofit called Ceres, and I've seen how politicians react when business people walk into the room in a good way and say, we need carbon regulation, we need decent education, we need a reasonable healthcare system. It's very helpful to have business in moving in this direction. And so many people spend so much time at work. Imagine that at work, the people around you are talking about the big problems and how they can be fixed, and
Sure.
really sharing the data. That I think could make a real difference.
And that just, to me, comes down more and more to, especially with these younger generations, listening to your workers, right? And remaking the American worker a stakeholder in the business and the industry and our economy.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I talk in the book about employee-owned firms, which is not a form for everyone, but is incredibly powerful. And we know from the data that when a firm is genuinely employee-owned and controlled, wages go up, wealth goes up, and the business does just fine. There's so much energy and excitement and power in, I hate the word ordinary people, in us.
Sure.
In us.
No, but it's true, and I think it's important because America, especially these days, has become a system of castes, and again, coming back to the Koch brothers, they haven't just, and so many others like them. They're just sort of the figurehead, the bad final boss of this dark money side of it. But they haven't just campaigned to take everything for themselves. They have outright, in such a comprehensive way, spent decades reducing the status and the power of the ordinary American, literally from birth, right?
Right.
And of course, again, everyone is affected, but especially Black people and Latinx people.
Oh.
The average American, right, is born healthy, less healthy than other developed countries on average, but because our healthcare system's a nightmare, but better than much of the world. But their parents can't take paid leave from their hourly job, so probably only one parent works. So they can't send them to preschool because we don't have universal preschool, but they can go to public elementary school, which is probably not that good because people like the Koch brothers have destroyed public education in availability and quality. So now that student is less prepared for higher education, right? And less prepared for knowledge work, which seems to be the only thing that pays. But they've also funded these efforts to cut taxes everywhere. So again, the corporations have spent so much more on buybacks than on their workers that wages haven't gone up to match healthcare or to match college funding.
And you haven't mentioned actively smashing unions.
Of course, no.
Research suggests that without unions, it's super hard to keep wages, or buying politicians who would keep minimum wage laws low.
Exactly.
Or turning a blind eye. This is a crazy thing. I'm British, and when I first learned that every town funds its own educational system, I was like, "You're kidding, right?"
Oh God!
Because that means if you're born in a poor place, you have crap education.
Yeah, and it just how does that get better? It doesn't, right?
It doesn't.
But it's crazy because oh my God, it's like so you've got all the reduced taxes and then the tax cuts of a couple years ago, but these have been going on for so long. That means reduced government income, right? If we're coming back to the ordinary person, we just did a conversation on how one of your fellow Brits did this incredible, groundbreaking investigation on how drinking water is unaffordable for so many people in America. Drinking water, the one thing that everybody needs, right? And part of that is because there's reduced government income because there's reduced taxes. And so our infrastructure is a complete nightmare.
Right.
So this average American worker, the ordinary person you mentioned, and I swear this ties into like how to reform business. They're less educated. They're less able to participate in capitalism because they can't afford any of these stocks. They eat less healthy food and drink less clean water. They stay in their job because the only way to get health care,
Right.
I mean, Obamacare is a mess. The only way to get health care is to have a job and to pay off their student loan debt. So they're not getting ahead or anything. Like you said, unions don't exist, so they can't actually fight for higher wages or benefits in any way. And all the politicians are totally bought already. We have these incumbents for 60 years.
And listen to what you're saying. Business has shot itself in the foot. Because then when you turn to the workforce, and half the workforce is going to be people of color very quickly. Half the consumer base is going to be people of color very quickly. But if you've turned a blind eye to the fact that, so many people in this country have no chance of making good or building a decent life for themselves, you're like, what kind of country do we have? What kind of workforce do we have? What kind of market do we have? This is so short-sighted. It makes me so heartbroken and so angry. I hardly know what to do. You started a podcast. I wrote a book.
Yes, I know. I always joke. And of course, we're very proud of our work here and we're very proud of like any difference we can make. But I always joke, like my children are going to grow up and say, Dad, when the world was on fire, what did you do? I'm going to say, well, I started a podcast. But no, look, I want to turn it back to where you were. Forgive my long rant there, which is what I literally woke up this morning thinking about. But this system has been designed, to be clear, by guys who look like me for 100 years. It has been designed to reduce the American citizen and worker's role in democracy and capitalism. But these workers, they don't want to leave. I mean, some want to leave America. Most don't want to leave. For the people of color, they cannot. They want it to work, right? For her, for her parents, for her children. One of my favorite conversations was with the now editor of the Boston Globe opinion section, Bina Venkataraman, who said, we have to find a way to be better ancestors, right? And we're counting on this next generation because all the boomers are about to retire, right? But if this worker, excuse me for 1 second, as fucked up as everything is, if she gets a job at one of these new purpose-driven companies we've talked about today, she will live an entirely different life, from paying her bills to working towards practical solutions for water or climate change or clean energy than the one described above. And to me, that is why business can take this leadership role. So
that's why I do this work, because, the system is one thing, but if you work at a firm and you have some power, you have the opportunity to change the lives of, 20 people, I'll take it. 50 people, 1,000, 10,000. Sure. Really, you said it. These jobs are quite different jobs. And it's not just the pay and benefits. It's the respect. It's the power. It's the knowledge that you're making a difference where you work. People need dignity as much as they need food. Now, I'm not knocking food, not living hand to mouth, but the whole package is what's needed to make a whole human being. And we can do that. We have the technology, we have the resources, we have the wealth.
Of course. I mean, we do. It's just that only a few people have the wealth. Would you say to that young woman now in 2020, 5 months into COVID with the climate crisis barking down our back, but knowing what you know about the ESG that has these companies and these indexes that have proven all the studies that show that these companies do better and that more of them are coming and that there's from JetBlue to Allbirds, would you say this young worker, is she going to get the opportunity to work at one of these companies? And what will it take from the rest of us to help her do that?
Statistically, it's going to be hard. We're still at the beginning. Maybe 5% of companies, maybe 10%. But it's not zero. So I think in her lifetime, odds are very good she'll get that chance. And I'm doing everything I can to increase the odds. And I know thousands of people who are trying to do that too. It really feels to me as if COVID may have opened a door that we can no longer kid ourselves that things are okay, they're not okay. And so many people are moving and trying to make change. And we can see the path. And it's profitable. I think we can do this.
Mm-hmm. I hope so. on that note, I want to talk about these specific action steps that our listeners can take to support this mission of yours. That is might be the only mission that's worthwhile, because we have to save the place. And as we like to say, some semblance of using their voice, their vote, and their dollar. Again, one of our overarching goals is to shine a light as practically as we can on where we need to go as a people. So what would you say are maybe some of the big but actionable and specific questions that our listeners should be asking of their representatives? And I guess in that case, as shareholders as well of the companies that either they work for. I was going to go as
shareholders and employees as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're a shareholder, push your firms and your investment managers to invest in purpose-driven firms, which have a proven track record and good, clear measures. If you work at a firm, look around. Sophia at JetBlue changed the whole firm. And in the beginning, she was just the lady hired to get rid of the soda cans. Many firms are very badly managed, and they would be hugely improved if they were more purpose-driven and thinking more about the common good. So do what you can at work. Join together with friends. As a neighbor, pull together. You must say this all the time on this show. But, a friend of mine founded an NGO called Mothers Out Front, which was all about addressing climate change because she thought mothers had a real interest in the long-term health of the climate and they're passionate about their kids. And what she has found is that 20 moms showing up to hearing after hearing make an enormous difference. Her group identifies gas leaks, works with regulators to insist that the gas companies fix those gas leaks because gas is just methane. It's a horrible greenhouse gas and it's leaking out across every city in the country. Insist that your representatives put in place decent regulation to make sure we head off climate change. I'm sure you've had other shows where you've talked about the details, but essentially it should be expensive to burn fossil fuels. And as soon as we do that, we can really transition the economy. But, insist on minimum wage legislation, on paid sick leave, on decent childcare, on the right to unionize and to get together with other people so that you can argue for your rights. And insist, please, the most important, on free elections. Let's get money out of politics. Let's make sure that gerrymandering is illegal. Let's enforce the Voting Rights Act. Let's make sure that everybody has a vote. Because all the policy ideas I could give you around education and health and so on will mean nothing if we don't have the politicians in place who can elect them, if we don't find a way to fight back against the power of money. And I'm a big fan of a wealth tax myself. Perhaps it's okay that Mr. Gates himself is rich beyond the dreams of avarice. He did create a lot of value, but I'm not at all clear why his children should be that rich. To be fair, Mr. Gates shares my opinion, but excuse me, why are the Walmart children between them richer than the bottom half of the American population? What did they do? Why should they have that much power? I really don't get that.
Yeah, I'm firmly with you. And again, I think it all comes down to, look, voting still works, but it's pretty damn hard to come by at this point. And again, you want to go back to the Koch brothers, like one of the biggest things they founded. I mean, how difficult it is right now for a Black person, a brown person, a Latinx person to vote, all the way from getting time off at their hourly job to having, 4 voting locations where there used to be 400.
It's a national disgrace. I mean,
it's a disgrace, and it feels
just as CEOs step up and say LGBTQX discrimination is not acceptable, every business leader in the country should be standing up and saying voter suppression is completely unacceptable.
Yeah, it just feels. I mean, and it's crazy. It does feel like we're in, we're on the plains of Mordor here a little bit, in the sense that, it's 2020 and redistricting and gerrymandering is on the line, and climate change is on the line, and we're fighting with one hand behind our backs because all these people can't get to their voting locations or they've been stopped from registering to voting. But we have to win it.
We have to win it anyway.
And the thing I come back to is we have to win it because we have to, but we have to win it also because should we win it, there is such an incredible future ahead the things that are possible as far as like there's so much of the climate crisis and carbon that is baked in, of course, but the things that are possible from clean energy to medicine are really astounding, and we just have to get there.
It's amazing. So, yeah, I mean, we need to change the current administration. We really need to change the current administration. But we have the science and the technology to build a world that works for everyone. We'll never be able to heal the planet completely, but my goodness, we can go a very long way. I was a professor at MIT for 20 years. The technology I see is out of sight. If we can find a way to put it into place, we can build a truly just and sustainable world.
I'm with you. I'm there. I'm ready to do it. Listen, Rebecca, I know you got to run soon. I won't keep you for more than another couple minutes. If you have any other, first of all, thank you for all of your time and everything you're doing in your incredible book. If you have any recommendations for other world-changing humans such as yourself we should talk to, please feel free to send them to me. We always love recommendations. Last couple questions, and then I will get you out of here. I swear they're quite quick. Rebecca, when was the first time in your life when you realized you had the power of change or the power to do something meaningful?
It's so mundane. The first time one of my students sent me an email saying, Rebecca, I used what you taught me in my company and it made a real difference. That was like the best moment, and there's still the best moments. When people tell me that something I said was actually useful.
That's pretty special. I mean, I'm the son of a teacher and of a public school teacher, and you know, you really can have all of the influence in the world in the most wonderful way.
Yeah.
Doing that. Rebecca, who is someone in your life that has positively impacted your work in the past 6 months?
It's hard to choose. I've met so many amazing people on this journey I'm on. I think the person who's had the most impact on me is a British economist called Kate Raworth.
Okay.
She wrote a book called Donut Economics.
Oh, I love that book.
I love that book. I was on a panel with her. She is totally amazing. There's something she says I don't agree with, but her general sense that, like, excuse me, we have to completely redo the structure of the economy. We cannot go on cutting down all the forests, poisoning the oceans, and treating people like dirt. It's not going to work. She's so direct. She's so funny. She captures the ideas so quickly and so well. And she's really given me a shot in the arm, which is to say what I really believe, even if it's a bit radical and people are going to disagree, because we don't have any time. And we have to change the world. So I love meeting Kate. It was just 20 minutes on a shared panel, but that's what I really remember as I look back.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I'm so glad she's enabled to go forward with your sword of fire, to tear into this incredible issue. On the subject of the ticking clock, Rebecca, what is your self-care these days? What do you do when you're like, that's enough fighting for a good world today?
I'm reading all the Harry Potter in sequence.
Nice.
Watching the movies when I get to the end of the book with my husband and son. And we are having so much fun. That's
my 7-year-old's doing the same thing right now.
Well, I'm not ashamed.
Please don't be. I just reread them a month ago.
There's something about stepping into a controllable world, and such a wonderful world, and a world where good wins in the end. So
it's just nice.
So that's my major self-care project at the moment.
I love it. I exclusively read fiction at night these days because, like you said, it is a controllable world, and it is not this one. Last question. If you could we have an incredible list of book recommendations from past guests. They're all up on Bookshop. People can find that in our show notes. But the question we usually use to guests to drive that recommendation is, Rebecca, if you could send one book to the President of the United States, what book would that be?
Why Nations Fail by Daron Acemoglu. Perfect.
We will add it to it, and I'm sure he will, not understand it. But that is a good one. Rebecca, where can our listeners follow you online?
I'm Recap Rebecca on Twitter, and I'm active on LinkedIn. So you can just find me Rebecca Henderson on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Rebecca, I cannot thank you enough for your time today and your thought and all the work you've put into your years of teaching and this book, this great sum of all the parts that makes all of your wisdom and the operable wisdom so much more accessible to so many more folks. And I'm excited to use it as a blueprint going forward.
Wow. Thank you for your kind words, Quinn. In the end, none of us are going to make any difference. We're all just pebbles, stardust in the wind. But it's pebbles that start avalanches. So I think we can change the world. Thank you very much for all you do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we will talk to you again soon. Well, I'll call you after the world is saved. It'll be great.
We'll have a party.
It'll be fantastic. Take care, Rebecca.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks to our incredible guest today, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. We hope this episode has made your commute or awesome workout or dishwashing or fucking dog walking late at night that much more pleasant. As a reminder, please subscribe to our free email newsletter at importantnotimportant.com. It is all the news most vital to our survival as a species.
And you can follow us all over the internet. You can find us on Twitter at importantnotimp. Just so weird. Also on Facebook and Instagram at Important Not Important. Pinterest and Tumblr, the same thing. So check us out, follow us, share us, like us. You know the deal. And please subscribe to our show wherever you listen to things like this. And if you're really fucking awesome, rate us on Apple Podcasts. Keep the lights on. Thanks.
Please.
And you can find the show notes from today right in your little podcast player and at our website, importantnotimportant.com.
Thanks to the very awesome Tim Blaine for our jammin' music, to all of you for listening, and finally, most importantly, to our moms for making us. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.